Hey everybody, welcome to Talking 10, where we do our top 10 lists of various things, of basically anything. Here we are for episode 2. Our first episode we did top 10 horror movies, and since this weekend is Wrestlemania, I thought it would be fun to do a top 10 Wrestlemanias. I'm your host as always, Chad. This is my co-host, Joe. How you doing tonight, Joe?
I'm doing good. Definitely a fun topic, and like you said, a timely topic into what's going on, and interested to do a second episode after our first. Kind of getting used to it by now. Got the first one out of the way. Now we get to the second and see how it goes.
Yeah, I really enjoyed our first, and I think this will be kind of up our alley too, because we're big wrestling fans, and we've done a lot of wrestling podcasts. So this is kind of like two worlds combining here with our podcast here. But yeah, before we get started here, WrestleMania is coming up. You excited for it?
I wish I could say I could, but not really. Yeah. Not as much as one used to be.
It's not the best card. I think I'm looking more forward to NXT TakeOver, which isn't even really like NXT right now. Isn't even what it used to be, but you're pretty much always guaranteed a fun show at least. Whereas WrestleMania, you're guaranteed a 5 or 6 hour long show, which yeah, I'm not too excited for it.
Yeah, definitely.
I am excited to talk about some of our favorite WrestleManias here.
Yeah, definitely. Even this was kind of hard because, again, we talked about our criteria last time for the horror movies, and even with WrestleMania, it's kind of like I had to think of a few things, because I did take into account if I went to it, because that's a whole different aspect, having to judge that from a kind of biased point of view, but at the same time too, it's like some of the earlier ones too. Obviously, I wasn't even alive for some of the earlier ones, so it's like I have to think back, going back in retrospect, kind of when I used to rent tapes as a kid, and which one stuck out to me, and obviously stuff like that. So kind of a weird criteria for these. Go ahead.
I think it's kind of hard to be unbiased for anything, because you might be in a better mood watching one than you are a different one.
That's true.
And I want to state again, I kind of stated this with the first one. This is just our favorites. This is not what we're saying is the best. This is our favorites, although I have a feeling we have the same number one, and I have a feeling it really is the best. But we'll get to that. Now, I'm gonna do my number 10, and Joe's gonna do his number 10. I'm gonna do my number 9, so on, like we did last week, in case you haven't listened yet. So I'm gonna start with my number 10 WrestleMania here, and I went with WrestleMania 23, which is it's funny because at the time I really wasn't that high on this WrestleMania, and I mentioned moods and stuff. I was kind of in a bad mood that day. I remember I was kind of sick that day, so it kind of affected my enjoyment of the show. But when I'm looking back at past shows and just remembering a lot of stuff and what I liked, there was a lot on this. There was a lot of bad on this show. I'll say that, but there's a lot of good on this show. There was the Undertaker Batista match, which was awesome. I think that was probably my favorite match on the show. There was the John Cena, Shawn Michaels match, which was awesome. Pretty memorable for the Donald Trump thing, which, yeah, not too much to say about that. But that's probably what probably most people remember the pay-per-view for. But for me, yeah, I think it's definitely the Undertaker, Batista, and John Cena, Shawn Michaels match. And pretty good Money in the Bank, too. Mr. Kennedy was the winner. That didn't really work out too well, but the match was always fun. And yeah, there was some not so great matches on this show. There was Khali versus Kane, and remember the ECW originals versus the New Breed wasn't anything too special. I remember they had a better match on TV.
They definitely did.
I remember the Melina Ashley match where the lights went out halfway through it. But yeah, that was my top 10 WrestleMania.
It's a good choice. I didn't really put that one on mine, truthfully, but I do remember that was a pretty fun WrestleMania. My number 10 is actually WrestleMania 9, which I felt I kind of had to put on here. It's not really thought of as a most memorable WrestleMania, and obviously there's a lot of controversy with the main event. But I kind of feel the atmosphere that really added to the show. And even though they weren't the best matches, I felt like just the whole vibe in general was kind of cool with that show. And I remember as a kid just kind of fondly watching that, especially, that was before I lived in Las Vegas. But, even as a kid looking back on that WrestleMania, it's just kind of cool to kind of know that it took place there for me.
Yeah, that's on my list too, actually, but it's a couple down, so I think I'll talk about it then. But yeah, it really, I think that's kind of an underrated WrestleMania. I can see why a lot of people don't like it, but we'll get to that. My number 9, sorry. My number 9 was WrestleMania 20, which was a very classic WrestleMania. It had a great main event, but I feel like it's kind of tainted in some ways for obvious reasons. because, Benoit, and kind of hard to watch now, especially the ending after the match. And but, I mean, you can't really take away from, as it was at the time, it was a really awesome main event. Eddie and Kurt Angle had a great match. The Undertaker went back to being the dead man for the first time in many years. Definitely had to put that on here.
Yeah, that one's actually a little bit higher for me, so I'll get to that one later on too. But I had to put that one on there too because I have a lot of good memories of that one. Even though there's kind of, like you said, the main event's kind of tainted, but there's a lot of good memories of the rest of it, so I had to put that on there too. Just the crowd in general was kind of fun for that atmosphere. So,
all right, yours?
Mine is actually WrestleMania 12, which won't make a lot of people's lists, and honestly, it really only makes my list because it was like the first WrestleMania I went to, and it kind of holds that special memory. So, like, the main event's always kind of a weird thing where it's like some people, love the main event, some people kind of find, it overrated, or, something like that went too long or whatnot, but I always kind of just remember the fun memories of that, and kind of the first time, being about 8 years old, I got to go to something like that, so that's kind of why that one went out for me there.
I don't think it's a bad WrestleMania. Yeah, I didn't add it to my list, but yeah, the main event, the end of it was very memorable with the boyhood dream, Shawn winning the title for the first time. That was a great moment. Taker and Diesel was actually better than I expected. I remember that was on there. Seeing Triple H get squashed by the Ultimate Warrior. But yeah, the main event, like, I don't know. I'm not a big fan of Iron Man matches because I feel like you're kind of just sitting there waiting for the end. Like if I'm going to see an hour-long match, and I like some hour-long matches, but if I'm going to see an hour-long match, I'd rather just have a match that could end at any time because then the drama's always there. Whereas with Iron Man, it's like it feels like they're killing a lot of time before it gets to the nitty-gritty of it.
Yeah, I can understand that mindset. I do think some Iron Mans pulled it off well, though. That was kind of the standard pair of the first one, but I definitely think there's some Iron Mans that can pull that drama off well as well.
All right. My number 8 was WrestleMania 19, which was, I feel like a lot of people wouldn't have that on their list, but I feel like
I surprisingly do later on, but
wow.
I do.
I feel like that was a pretty underrated WrestleMania. It had the great Chris Jericho-Shawn Michaels match. Not quite as good as their matches later on during 2008, but it was still a very memorable match. You had the very memorable match with Brock and Kurt Angle where Brock missed the shooting star press, and I thought they had a really good match before that. And probably one of the not so good things on the pay-per-view. I actually like the Triple H Booker T match, but Triple H really should not have won that match, especially with the feud going into it.
The way he wanted to.
Yeah, and the feud kind of had the racial tones to it, which just really not good when the racist guy wins in the end. But yeah, I really enjoyed that pay-per-view. Yeah,
me too. I mean, that's on my list later on. I'll talk a little more about it, but yeah, definitely.
We're probably gonna have a lot of the same choices here.
Probably in different order, but yeah. My number 8 choice is actually WrestleMania 3, which is a pretty significant WrestleMania, and the reason it's not higher on my list is because I kind of watched it a little later on, like in the VHS days I talked about. So I like it, and I like obviously the Macho Man and Ricky Steamboat match was like a big match, and Hogan and Andre was a spectacle. I can't really put that too much higher just because I kind of watched it after, but I had to put that on the list somewhere because it's such a big WrestleMania in retrospect. So.
Yeah, I feel like I should probably put it on my list because it is a very memorable WrestleMania, but it just isn't one of my favorites. Like I did like it. Obviously, I was only I think I was 1 year old when I think it was the first WrestleMania I was even alive for, and you weren't even alive yet. But I did watch it years later, and very memorable moment with Hulk and Andre, and I liked the Randy Savage Ricky Steamboat match. I feel like it wasn't nearly as good as the Ric Flair Ricky Steamboat matches. I feel like that match is a little overrated to me in some ways, but it was a good WrestleMania. Just I wouldn't put it in my top 10. I'm not a huge fan of 80s WWE for whatever reason. I just maybe it's just because it was before my time, but I just have a hard time getting into it.
No, I can understand that. I mean, for me, it wasn't ranked higher, but just again, that was a little too before my time, but I still appreciate what it was. So I felt like I had to put it on too.
All right, my number 7 was WrestleMania 18, from Canada. Is that on your list?
It is on my list.
Yeah, that was a great WrestleMania. I think the most memorable match from that would be Rock and Hogan, which I don't know if you'd call it a great match, but it was a great spectacle. And I thought it was a good match for what it was, and just really, really cool to see these two legends going at it, the current legend and the all-time legend. Let's see, what else was on there? Austin and Scott Hall. That was kind of, I don't know, that wasn't really a great match. I feel like it was okay. It wasn't really that memorable.
Yeah, but it was still kind of just seeing Austin and Hall was kind of just the main lure of that, I think.
The main event really wasn't that good either. Triple H and Jericho. I don't know why I put this on here, but
well, I think it's mostly because of Hogan and the reaction he got. So,
and I think I just enjoyed wrestling a lot in that period, where it's like I can kind of look back and maybe it wasn't the best pay-per-view overall, but I think Rock Hogan kind of carried it, and I think just the atmosphere of it, I enjoyed it.
I definitely can't argue with that. We're number 7, right? Just so I keep track of.
Yep, number 7.
I feel like mine is almost the same exact reason as yours because it's like kind of a one-match show. But I remember as a kid, I was so into the idea of the match. Another match I watched later on VHS, but WrestleMania 6 with Warrior and Hogan. I just remember that was like a huge deal to me as a kid. So I had to put that on the list. Like the rest of the show really isn't that memorable. There's just that one match that kind of just defines that show for me, and I had to put it on just because I remember like as a kid, I remember going into a video store and seeing that in the section and be like, oh man, I finally get to see this. So I got to go with that one.
They had an even better match in WCW. I don't know if you know that or not.
I think I was there for that match. Yeah, I'm pretty sure I was there for that match.
I wouldn't brag about that, but
some places that might get you beat up.
That didn't make my list either, but that was definitely a classic WrestleMania. And that match was actually surprisingly good, too. I mean, you wouldn't expect a Hulk Hogan Ultimate Warrior match to work as well as it did, but I mean, I think when you just kind of leave them to their own devices, you get what you got in WCW. But I think Pat Patterson had a lot to do with that, from what I hear. Yeah,
definitely. Just the idea of those two facing was kind of like different. It's kind of like two guys who were like poised to be at the top, and back then, top guys are kind of protected in a lot of ways, like and done better than they are now. So it's kind of just this big battle. It's kind of like, it's funny because you picked 18 there. It's kind of like Hogan and Rock in a way. It's just like two icons that are fighting, and just works out. Feels epic.
Kind of, but I think Rock and Hogan was bigger in the moment because.
I definitely agree with that. Yeah,
the thing with Hogan and Warriors, it was supposed to be a passing of the torch, but Warrior really didn't work on top that well. He didn't draw that well, and Hogan didn't really help. He kind of did some subtle things here, like the kicking out like 1 second after the 3, and he did some little subtle things after the match where it's like he kind of looks like he's getting everyone to root for Warrior, but he's really kind of getting everyone to root for him. Hogan was a master at that stuff.
Yeah, I can't argue with that. Like I don't think it's like as good as Hogan and Rock, but I'm just saying that's kind of like the same dynamic in the sense of two guys like that. So.
Oh yeah. Also, the first face versus face WrestleMania main event.
Yeah, that too. That's why it stands out because I was so different back then.
My number 6 was WrestleMania 9, which people are probably thinking it's even weirder that I put it that much higher than you did, but I kind of have to, just because it was my first WrestleMania. It was the first WrestleMania I ever saw, so there's just kind of this emotional attachment to it. I remember my grandfather and I used to watch that tape a lot, and looking at it from like smart guys, I can definitely see why a lot of people did not like that show. Hogan once again kind of stole the spotlight in the end, and there really wasn't anything that good on the show, like match-wise. I think Shawn Michaels and Tatanka would probably be like the best match, and that wasn't even really that good. It was just like the only really decent thing on the show. But just the feel of the show, the spectacle, the Roman Coliseum. I loved Undertaker coming out with the vulture or whatever it was. Just a very memorable WrestleMania. I don't know if I could call it a good one, but it's one of my favorites just because it's so memorable and just because there's so many memories attached to it.
Yeah, and I feel like I put a couple on here too, just because of atmosphere. Like they kind of just some WrestleMania, like it's kind of one of those things where you just kind of expect atmosphere, and when you get the perfect atmosphere, it just kind of adds to it. So sometimes that, even if it's not such a good show, it kind of sticks in your memory and you kind of just remember it. So I definitely can see that.
You got to mention Undertaker Giant Gonzalez, because that was a very memorable match.
That's almost up there with the second Warrior and Hogan match. Almost.
It's kind of funny because the Undertaker had that long streak that went on for over 20 years, but even though he won that match on a technicality, like that's always like the least impressive match when you're looking at it, like at all the streak matches, because he, like, they did the ether or whatever it was, and he like passed out. And,
he got like, beat up for a lot of it too. I remember.
Yeah, kind of like one of those weird things where it's like they would always kind of make it look in the video packages like he was getting the best of Giant Gonzalez, but that really wasn't the case.
Honestly, the thing I remember most in those video packages is the Vulture match, and that's like the most, the most they focus on from that.
That was a really cool entrance.
It was.
That was also the first WWE pay-per-view that JR was on.
Yep. Wow. I was with I think he cut the shoot promo where we talked about being in a toga or something like that. Kind of like that classic line.
Going from the NWA and WCW to being in a toga.
Yep. My number 6 was actually, well, when you picked 2, WrestleMania 18, and I put that here because, again, it was kind of the better version of what, Warrior and Hogan was supposed to be, and I kind of, you couldn't really put it too much higher because, like you said, it just wasn't the best card, but it, the atmosphere with the crowd in Toronto and just that match in general just kind of carry it along, so I had to put that on the list.
Yeah, and I kind of mentioned this, but I think just the period, I think just because I'm such a big fan of that period, just did.
Yeah,
I don't know, it just makes it seem better than it was, but... Alright, my number 5 was WrestleMania 14, which was, for me, I kind of look at that as the kickoff of the Attitude Era. I know some people consider, like, 97 the Attitude Era, like, the start of it, and I can kind of see that, but for me, like, the real moment that kicked off the Attitude Era was Austin winning the title. That was always what I considered to be, like, the start of the Attitude Era as a kid. And I thought that was a really good WrestleMania in general. I thought Austin and Shawn Michaels had a great match. That you had the memorable Shawn entrance with the DX band. Is that on your list too?
It's one of those I thought about, and I feel like it should have been, but I just couldn't. Like, I think it was between that and 12, and it was like, I just have so many better, fonder memories of 12 being there that kind of went out in the end. But I think historically, I would have, like, if I was doing a historic list, I probably would have put 14 on there. I definitely can see your points on there.
You also had the Undertaker-Kane match, and Tombstone and Pete Rose, which was very memorable. Just everything about that show just felt so Attitude Era in a good way. Like 15 kind of feels like Attitude Era in a bad way, but 14 just feels like everything good about the Attitude Era.
Yeah, I definitely can agree with that.
The match with this Jack and Terry Funk versus the New Age Outlaws. That was fun.
Honestly, if I kind of feel my list, I kind of I don't want to say overlooked the Attitude Era portion. I just kind of I don't know. I guess kind of like you said, it's kind of like I just remember being a bigger fan, being online at the time. In the later periods, I kind of picked some of these shows just because they kind of stick out to me more.
The thing is, a lot of the Attitude Era WrestleManias really weren't that good. Like 15 had a good main event, but it really wasn't like a great WrestleMania. 16 really, I wouldn't consider. I know you were there. I wouldn't really consider that a great WrestleMania either. I mean, it was okay, but it didn't. That
didn't even make my list. I was there. But my number 5 is another atmosphere one, and it had some match on there too. It was WrestleMania 24, which was the Orlando one. I believe it was Orlando. It was one of the Florida things, but they had like the good-looking set with the palm trees and stuff. And I kind of like that, just in general, that set, because I feel like, we get a lot of stadium shows. I feel like, some of the sets are standard. I feel like there was such a unique look for the set that kind of added to it. And you also had some, like Ric Flair's last match on there, which Shawn Michaels, which is pretty emotional. And I kind of feel like that kind of sticks out. There's some stuff on here that wasn't like as great, obviously, but I don't know. I just kind of remember like some of that, like not all of that show, like some of that show was kind of memorable in a way, and I kind of like the atmosphere. So I had to put that one on the list. Kind of hard to make the top 5, but I had to. I picked that one over some of the others. Go ahead.
Honestly, I have it even higher than you do. I'll get into it when I get to my point on the list, but I think that's a great choice. I'm going to go with number 4 now, WrestleMania 10, which is a classic WrestleMania. And I think everybody remembers really the 2 classic matches, which was Bret versus Owen and Shawn versus Razor, the ladder match. And they're both great in different ways. Like Bret and Owen was this great technical wrestling match. I think Bret and Owen kind of holds up better, because if you watch that in 2017, it's still a great match. Whereas if you watch Shawn and Razor, like, it's still fun, but there's been so many crazy ladder matches since then that it just doesn't really hold up as well. But yeah, 2 classic matches, and the rest of the show was fun too. It was kind of nice to see Brett and Yoko kind of redeem themselves after last year, after that Hulk Hogan thing. So Brett got to end the show off as the champion, and it kind of didn't really kick it off because the feud was already going on, but it really kind of kicked it off in a big way, the Brett and Owen feud, because Owen had beaten Brett earlier in the night. So when Brett was like celebrating with the title and all the faces came out to celebrate with him, like Owen comes out and just like stares him down like you piece of crap, like I beat you and now you're the champion. I thought that was great.
Yeah, I definitely agree with that. It's actually on my list too, a little slightly higher up. It's kind of funny because I remember when I was thinking about this list, I actually came down to that in 25 because it's Shawn and Undertaker, which I felt kind of bad omitting on this list because it's such a classic match. But it's like I just couldn't put it on just because of that one match. It was, you know what I mean? It's just like I had to think of it.
Yeah, I totally know what you mean. Because it's like Shawn and Taker, like that's probably my favorite match of all time. Like all matches, that's my favorite match of all time. And I didn't put that on here because the rest of the show was pretty bad. I mean, you had the Triple H and Orton match was one of the weaker WrestleMania main events. You had the Kid Rock concert for like 15 minutes. I don't consider that a very good WrestleMania.
No, it's mostly just that one match. That's why, like, I had to think about it. 10 won out because of that. But my number 4 was actually WrestleMania 20, which you mentioned earlier. I kind of have, good memories of that, but it's just one of those things where it's like, it's kind of tainted in a way. It probably would be higher than that if it wasn't for that, but it's kind of tainted. Yeah. So I definitely, remember fond memories of the actual show and just kind of like being at a... It
was a great moment at the time because we were seeing these 2 guys that we had watched and cheered on for years and seeing them get their due, which was something, you kind of see it more now, that you see like all these people like Punk came in, won the title, Daniel Bryan come in and won the title. At the time, you didn't really get that. You mostly just got WWE had their guys. So to see 2 guys that we had seen that were considered like these great wrestlers like get their moment was a pretty big thing.
Yeah, and they were kind of like, considered held down for a while. So it's kind of, I mean, even just in other promotions where it's like, right now there's like no real true number 2. I guess you could maybe, give TNA an argument with AJ Styles, but other than that, it's like there's no true number 2 for guys who, were kind of held down like they were. And even AJ Styles was a champion with them, whereas like, in WCW, Benoit had it like a day and that was it. So it's like one of those things where it was kind of different. But yeah, I would definitely go with 20 there. It's one of those ones that, it's one of those better all around ones than some of the other ones I listed, and also like had that moment. So I had to put it as number 4.
My number 3 is WrestleMania 8, which was actually WrestleMania 9 was the first one I ever saw, but I actually went out and rented WrestleMania 8 like shortly after. And I have a lot of fond memories of that WrestleMania, much like I do 9, except it was actually a good one. You had 2 really good matches, especially. You had Randy Savage and Ric Flair, which was an awesome match, and you had Bret Hart and Roddy Piper, which was an awesome match. And you had the whole main event thing with Hulk and Sid. Sorry, wow. Throat needs to be cleared here. Been talking a lot today, but... Yeah, you had the whole thing with Hulk and Sid, which, that wasn't really the best ending to a WrestleMania, but I thought Warrior's Return was pretty cool, and, you had the 2 great matches, that was also, like, kind of the return, too, to, like, a bigger arena after 7 was kind of in the smaller one, so, yeah, I like WrestleMania 8 a lot.
Yeah, that's a good one for match list. I actually didn't put that one on my list. I think I saw that one later too, if I remember right, and it's just like it's good. It doesn't like stand out as much to me, but I definitely I remember that Roddy Piper match was probably my favorite on that show. The more I think about it, just because I remember like there was like a Coliseum, not just that, there was like a Coliseum tape. I remember like that was one of the first before I saw this show. It was like one of the matches I saw, and I always liked that match in general. So definitely gotta give it to that.
Great finish too. Like we've seen that hit over time, but at the time it was kind of a unique finish.
Oh yeah, definitely. I think we saw like wasn't it Brett and Austin did something like that too, like somewhere similar. Yeah, so definitely like that finish. But My number 3 was actually one of your earlier ones, which was WrestleMania 10, because I feel like that was such a classic one, and it has, like the Shawn and Razor match you mentioned, it doesn't hold up as much with other ladder matches, but for the time, it was like such a huge thing, and I remember as a kid kind of getting into that, and their rematch, obviously, at that SummerSlam. And
I really like their rematch better. I might be in the minority there, but...
I kind of remember both, but I think I remember the rematch more as well, just because I remember like more vividly for some reason. But yeah, I had to pick this one because I feel like historically it's a pretty big one up there, so I had to go with that one too.
My number 2 was WrestleMania 24, which you mentioned earlier, and I just really love the atmosphere like you did. I think as far as atmosphere goes, it's one of the best WrestleManias.
Yeah, definitely.
Just the whole sunny Orlando thing, which at least we have that going for us this year. So maybe that'll improve this WrestleMania. I hope so. But I kind of dug the orange ropes too, just because orange is my favorite color. So it's kind of unique to see that, because you've never really seen orange ropes in WWE before.
Oh, not really.
And I thought Undertaker and Edge was a great, kind of underrated WrestleMania main event. I thought they had a really great match, and I kind of like Edge's promo there during the show where he's talking about, like, he was there for Hogan and Warrior, and he saw his hero, like, defeated, and he's talking about how, like, kids prepare to have see their hero be defeated. I thought that was a really great promo. I feel like nobody ever mentions that as, like, a great all-time promo, but I, like, consider that to be, like, a great all-time promo, and that was a great match. The Money in the Bank on that show was great. I remember Triple H and Cena and Orton had a fun 3-way. What else was on that show? I feel like there was a lot of good stuff on that show.
Yeah, it was definitely a good show. I looked over the list too, but it was like I remember some of that. I just forgot about the Edge promo too, but I remember that was pretty great because I kind of remember us talking about that time too.
Who did? Oh yeah, there was Shawn and Flair, which you mentioned.
Yep.
That was memorable. Yeah, just a great all-time show, I consider. And that's the most recent WrestleMania I have on here, so kind of says something. That's like the last WrestleMania I consider to be great, but kind of is.
Yeah, I mean, I put out my list too, so I definitely got it. I actually went with 19 for my number 2. I feel like you can't go wrong with either of those, but I feel like 19 was one that I just kind of remember vividly, because like, I remember like...
that higher.
I remember being like, I was still in I was in high school at the time because I think I just started. And I remember just being so excited that weekend. Like, I don't think I've ever matched that excitement for WrestleMania, as weird as it sounds. Just being so excited for a show and like being psyched for it and wanting to come, being ready to. I remember it was Friday and like school had ended, and I was just like, it's like a movie scene or something. You just come out, like you see a kid coming out of school, he's like all excited for the weekend. And then WrestleMania, I just remember like fond memories of that. And
sure, I really wanted to see those Miller Lite Cat girls.
Well, a teenager probably did. Let's be honest, but yeah, I just kind of like the card in general when you go over it. It's kind of funny because I remember that WrestleMania didn't really go down in terms of like the best business, if I remember right. Like at the time, it wasn't really like
it actually did. Yeah, it didn't do too well, which is kind of surprising.
But then you look at the card, and it's kind of like you have like Undertaker and Big Show and A-Train, and it's not really the best match.
Yeah, that was not a high point.
But even
Nathan Jones was originally going to be like Taker's partner. That was a very head-scratching decision.
But even when you look at that, like you look at the names on this list, and it's kind of like, when you think of WrestleMania, it's almost like this all-star list of wrestlers that they're just great, And it's like when I look at that, and I look at some of the other WrestleManias, this is like maybe the closest you come, not the closest you come because we're talking about number 1, but one of the closest you come to actually having like this full, complete card of very little that's bad, like talked a little bit about that, but I don't know. I just like the flow of it. And obviously, at the time, it was a height of fandom for me, and I had to pick that number 2 just because I feel like it's not the best, but it's up there for me. I remember liking a lot of the matches at the time. Just a lot of fun memories with that one, so I had to pick that one.
Even Hogan and Vince was a fun match.
Yeah, it's one of those matches that happened that was kind of like, even though it just had that feud to it, it was kind of like it just had that deep rooted feud to it with history. So. Yeah, definitely not the perfect WrestleMania, but some.
I really feel like I should have put that higher on my list. Like, I feel like it should have at least went over 18. Like, I just kind of instinctually put 18 over 19, but when I really look at the cards, like, 19 was a lot better than 18, I think.
Yeah, I feel like 19 was like it surprised me. Like I said, it did such low business because it feels like it really does feel like that's like what you should look at as WrestleMania with all these like all-star name stuff.
All right, I know this is going to be a big shock to everyone. because I know nobody ever talks about this WrestleMania. But I had to go with WrestleMania 17 for my number one. Man. I know. Very underrated one. I think everybody knew that we were going to pick 17. I already know you picked 17. Like, you didn't even tell me. I just know. Like, I think people just click WrestleMania list knowing that WrestleMania 17 is going to be the top one. I don't know. Maybe there's some other people out there that feel like another WrestleMania is better, but I don't know, man. 17 just had everything, and it was like the climax of like the biggest period of wrestling that I was alive for. Like, I wasn't really alive for a lot of the Hulkamania stuff. I was alive for like the tail end of it, but you know, like the popularity of the Attitude Era, and WCW just ended like a week before that show. Like, it was like the climax of like the Ultimate Wrestling period. And you had this awesome story with Austin and The Rock, where Austin had been gone for a year because they did the angle where he got hit by the car, and then The Rock kind of became the top guy, and Austin came back, but it wasn't quite the same. And they were doing the video packages where Austin says like I need to beat you, Rock, like I need to be the top guy again. He ends up selling his soul to Vince, which it hurt business. They probably shouldn't have done it, but I thought it was brilliant at the time, just for story's sake. I think the only thing that wasn't perfect to me about that was the inclusion of Deborah in that feud. That just seemed kind of random, but really perfect main event. Triple H and Taker, they had an awesome match. I feel like that's kind of like the lost Triple H Taker match because they never talk about it. They always talk about like the matches they had later at WrestleMania. But that was a great match. You had the gimmick Battle Royal. That was a lot of fun. I don't remember a bad match on the show. Like, Chyna and Ivory wasn't so great, but even then you got to see Chyna win the women's title for the first time. That was kind of a big moment. And even Vince versus Shane, as much as we all complain about the demands now, as much as we're all sick of them, like, Vince and Shane actually had a really, really fun match themselves.
Yeah, definitely. And it's one of those things where it was kind of story-oriented too, with the whole Linda aspect and her, like, getting up and kicking them, and then, like, the whole Trish aspect. So, yeah, like, inclusion of other people in the storyline, too, to get them on. So, it's definitely very, it did its purpose in getting everyone involved and kind of paint out that story. Kind of starting off the WCW thing, too, in a sense.
Just everything about that show. Like, even the Limp Bizkit song. Like, people can look back now and laugh. Like, Limp Bizkit, man, that's dated. They had, like, the perfect song, My Way. Yeah. That just defined that pay-per-view so perfectly. It just defined that era. Like, everything about that pay-per-view was perfect to me. All the feuds were done perfectly. A lot of the matches were great. You had TLC 2, which was a classic. They had a great... TLC at SummerSlam was great. I feel like TLC 2 even topped it. It was just a great spectacle. Benoit and Angle had this great wrestling match. There was literally something on that show for everybody.
Yeah, definitely. That's one of the reasons I included it on my list, too. It just feels like one of those, like I said, it's like a who's who of names where you look at it and you look at some of these names on there and like, that's what WrestleMania should be in a sense. That should be, and obviously now they're like, it's harder because a lot of their bigger names are part-timers and they don't create new stars. But, at the same time, it's like WrestleMania should be that list of, all-stars. That should be what it is.
Even like that hardcore match with Raven and Kane and Big Show. That was like one of the funniest hardcore matches I've ever seen. Like Kane driving the golf cart.
Yeah, the golf cart.
Dumps on the back. Just, man, wrestling was so fun back then.
Yeah, definitely. They also put a lot of effort, like you said, into the feud and stuff that it kind of just worked.
I respect everybody's opinions, but I really can't understand anyone not picking WrestleMania 17. Like, I know you mentioned before the show that, and we didn't even talk about each other's lists because we prefer not to know in advance what each other's lists are, but we kind of both knew we were going to pick WrestleMania 17, but you kind of mentioned to me that you'd seen some debate about WrestleMania 17, I guess, not being the best WrestleMania. I want to hear this. Like, what are their arguments against it?
Well, for your various forums and stuff, and I've seen people like suggest that 19 is better than 17 in the minority, but that's some people's opinion, and I can see a little bit why, but I definitely don't agree with that. I would always put 17 up top, but it's all in one's personal opinion in a sense, but that's the only one I ever see argued with it. I don't really see anything else argued with it.
Yeah, WrestleMania 19. I mean, it's arguable. And we forgot to even mention Austin Rockface there, too. That was Austin's last match. But,
yeah, it was one of the reasons I put on there, too. Just like when you look at that card, it goes up and down. So it's the only one that I feel like is really even comparable, but I still want to put it as a win.
that was our top 10 WrestleManias, everybody. That was fun.
Oh, yeah. Hopefully the comment section don't go crazy over what we pick, but remember, they're just our favorites, not so much the best that we think compared. So
that's the case with every episode of this. It's just our favorites. We're not saying these are necessarily the best, although WrestleMania 17 is the best. That is a fact. That is an undisputable fact, in my opinion. All right, everyone, I want to thank you all for listening, and we'll see you next time.
See you next time, everybody. Don't you dare miss it.